This video is for general, educational purposes only. It is researched from peer-reviewed studies and published wildlife agency guidance, and every source is linked in the description below. You have almost certainly seen the fact. It circulates every spring, on social media, in local news segments, on posters at garden centers. A single opossum eats 5,000 ticks a week. Sometimes the number is 5,500. Sometimes it is per season rather than per week. The figure moves around, but the message never does. Opossums are vacuum cleaners for ticks, and therefore you should protect the one living under your shed. It is a lovely fact. It has done more for the reputation of an unloved animal than any conservation campaign ever managed. And it is not true. In 2021, two researchers at Eureka College in Illinois, Cecilia Hennessy and Hild, published a study in a peer-reviewed parasitology journal with a deliberately unglamorous title, asking whether Virginia opossums are really ecological traps for ticks. What they did was simple, and it is the thing nobody had done before. They looked inside the animals. They collected 32 wild Virginia opossums from central Illinois, largely roadkill, and they dissected the stomachs. Then they examined the contents under a dissecting microscope, exhaustively, without sieving or pre-rinsing, because sieving can wash away small fragments. They were specifically hunting for ticks and for tick body parts. They found none, not a reduced number, not a smaller number than expected. 0. Across 32 animals, there was not a single tick or fragment of a tick in any stomach. What they did find is a good illustration of what an opossum actually eats: worms, beetles, seeds, a shrew, a French fry, broken glass. Opossums are indiscriminate scavengers, and their stomachs read like the floor of a car park, which is precisely why the absence of ticks is meaningful. These are animals that will eat almost anything, and they were still not eating ticks. Then the researchers did the second half of the work, which matters just as much. They went back through the scientific literature, looking for any prior study that had found ticks in an opossum's diet. They located 23 published diet analyses, 19 based on stomach or digestive tract contents, and 4 based on scat, some of them dating back to the 1800s. Not one of those studies identified ticks. Their conclusion was plain. Ticks are not a preferred diet item for Virginia opossums. So where did 5,000 come from? It came from a real study, published in 2009, and the number was never invented. What happened is subtler and more interesting than a lie. That study worked with captive opossums in a laboratory setting. Researchers placed ticks on the animals, then counted how many ticks were recovered afterwards. Ticks that could not be accounted for were assumed to have been groomed off and swallowed, and from that assumption, a weekly figure was extrapolated. The critical point is that the stomachs were never examined. Nobody checked whether the missing ticks had actually been eaten. And this is where the whole thing turns, because animals in laboratory conditions do not behave the way animals in a hedgerow behave. A captive opossum, confined, stressed, with nothing else to do and no other food to forage, being deliberately loaded with ticks, is in a situation that has no equivalent in the wild. It may well groom obsessively. It may well swallow what it removes. But a wild opossum walking through a field at night has 100 other things to eat and is not being covered in larval ticks by a researcher. The 2009 result was probably an accurate measurement of what captive opossums do. It simply was not a measurement of what wild opossums do. And the difference between those two things is the entire story. The authors of the 2021 paper made exactly that point in their recommendation, which was that laboratory-based studies of wildlife behavior should be ground-truthed against studies conducted in natural conditions. That is a dry sentence carrying a large idea. It is very easy to measure something real in a lab and then describe a world that does not exist. Now, does any of this mean you should get rid of the opossum in your garden? No. And this is where the video turns, because the honest position is more interesting than either the meme or the debunking. The opossum does not need the tick story. What is actually true about this animal is stranger than the thing the internet made up about it. Start with the one people are most frightened of, which is rabies. The claim you usually hear is that opossums cannot get rabies at all. That overstates it, but the underlying fact is real and it is unusual. Most placental mammals maintain a core body temperature somewhere between 98 and 102 degrees Fahrenheit. The Virginia opossum runs cooler, typically around 94 to 97. The rabies virus replicates poorly at that lower temperature, which slows the infection and gives the animal's immune system more time to respond. The result is not immunity, but a very large statistical difference. Fewer than 1% of opossums submitted for rabies testing in the United States come back positive, and they account for a tiny fraction of rabies cases in terrestrial animals. One study in Florida tested thousands of opossums across 3 decades and did not find a single positive case. So the accurate statement is that opossums are highly resistant to rabies rather than immune to it, and that the animal you are far more likely to encounter rabies in is a raccoon, a skunk, a fox, or a bat. The hissing, drooling opossum on your porch is not showing you symptoms. It is showing you a threat display from an animal that badly does not want to fight. Which brings us to the second thing, the one that is genuinely remarkable and almost nobody knows. Opossum blood contains a protein that neutralizes snake venom. It is called lethal toxin neutralizing factor, and it does not simply blunt the effect of one particular venom. It has been shown to neutralize venom from all the major snake families, including cobra, Russell's viper, rattlesnake, and sea snake. Researchers subsequently isolated a synthetic peptide derived from a fragment of that protein, just 10 amino acids long, designated LT10. That short peptide reproduces the neutralizing effect of the full protein, and it does not stop at snakes. In testing, it has also neutralized scorpion venom, honeybee venom, ricin from plants, and botulinum toxin from bacteria, while leaving non-toxic substances alone. Think about what that combination represents. A single small molecule that appears to disable an extremely broad range of unrelated biological toxins. This is being examined as a possible foundation for a universal antivenom, which matters enormously because conventional antivenom is species-specific, expensive to produce, requires refrigeration, and is frequently unavailable in precisely the rural regions where snakebite is most common. Snakebite kills somewhere in the order of 100,000 people a year globally and disables many more, overwhelmingly in poor rural communities. A cheap, broad-spectrum, heat-stable treatment would be an enormous change, and one of the leads came out of the blood of an animal people run over without slowing down. One honest caveat, because it gets exaggerated: venom neutralization does not make an opossum invulnerable to a snake. A large snake can still kill an opossum through the physical trauma of the bite itself. The venom is neutralized. The puncture wound and the tissue damage are not. Third, the animal itself is biologically peculiar in a way that has nothing to do with pest control. The Virginia opossum is the only marsupial native to North America. Everything else in the marsupial group lives in Australia, New Guinea, or South and Central America. Its young are born at a stage of development that is difficult to convey. They emerge after a gestation of under 2 weeks, at roughly the size of a honeybee, blind, hairless, and with their hind limbs barely formed. What they do have is functional forelimbs, and they use them to crawl unaided through their mother's fur to the pouch, attached to a nipple, and remain attached for weeks while they finish developing. A female typically has 13 nipples, and often produces more young than that, which means the crawl is a genuine race with real consequences. The ones that arrive late do not survive. After roughly 2 to 3 months in the pouch, the surviving young emerge and ride on their mother's back for a further period while they learn to forage. That image, a mother moving through a garden at night with 6 or 8 young clinging to her, is not a piece of anthropomorphic sentiment. It is the actual reproductive strategy of the animal. Fourth, the playing dead. Almost everyone believes this is a clever act, a decision the animal makes. It is not. What happens is an involuntary physiological response called thanatosis. Under extreme stress, the animal's nervous system triggers a catatonic state. It collapses, its body goes limp. Its breathing and heart rate slow dramatically, its tongue may loll, and its anal glands release a foul-smelling secretion that makes it smell convincingly like something that has been dead for some time. It can remain in that state for anything from a few minutes to several hours, and crucially, it cannot choose to stop. It is closer to fainting than to acting. There is something almost absurd about it as a defense. This is an animal whose response to serious threat is to have a stress-induced blackout and hope the problem goes away. It is not a predator. It is not aggressive. It is a scavenger built almost entirely around avoidance, which points at what an opossum genuinely does for the place it lives. It is not a tick control system, but it is a highly effective scavenger. Opossums eat carrion, rotting fruit, fallen eggs, snails, slugs, beetles, cockroaches, rodents, and a great deal of general organic waste. In an ecosystem, animals that remove carrion perform real sanitation work because carcasses left in place become breeding sites for flies and reservoirs for bacteria. They also take a genuine number of the invertebrates that gardeners spend money trying to remove. That is a less catchy claim than 5,000 ticks, and it has the advantage of being true. Now the honest caveat, because a video that only tells you good things is doing the same thing the meme did. Opossums are the definitive host of a protozoan parasite called Sarcocystis neurona, which causes equine protozoal myeloencephalitis in horses. Horses become infected by eating feed or drinking water contaminated with opossum feces, and the disease is neurological, causing incoordination, weakness, and muscle wasting. If you keep horses, this is a real management consideration, and it means securing feed storage and water sources rather than leaving them open. That is a genuine reason for a specific group of people to take specific precautions. It is not a reason to kill the animal, and it applies to almost nobody watching this in a suburban garden. So where does that leave the opossum in your yard? The instruction at the start of this video was not to kill it, and that instruction still stands. What has changed is the reason, not because it is eating 5,000 ticks a week, because it is not, but because it is an ancient, harmless, almost comically non-confrontational scavenger that is highly unlikely to carry rabies, that will not attack you or your pets, that is quietly removing carrion and invertebrates from your property, and that is carrying in its blood a molecule that medical researchers are actively studying as a route to a treatment that could save tens of thousands of human lives a year. There is a wider point sitting underneath all of this, and it is the reason this video was worth making rather than repeating the meme. The tick claim spread because it was useful. It gave people a simple, quantified, emotionally satisfying reason to care about an animal that most people found ugly. It worked. Opossum sentiment genuinely improved, and it was still wrong. And it spread through science communicators and wildlife charities and local news, all of whom were acting in good faith, none of whom checked whether anyone had looked inside the animal, a number that flattering rarely gets audited. The correction, published in a peer-reviewed journal, has traveled a tiny fraction as far as the myth did, which is the usual pattern. So the last thing worth saying is this. The opossum did not need the story. It has been around in one form or another for a very long time, doing a modest and unglamorous job in an animal so averse to confrontation that its body faints rather than fight. It never asked to be a hero. It just needs you to leave it alone, which it turns out is all it ever needed. This video is for general educational purposes only and is not veterinary, medical, or wildlife management advice. If you have concerns about wildlife on your property, contact your local wildlife agency or a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. Never handle wild animals